And hi again, everybody. Welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles with you tonight. And, of course, we're joined by Don Henderson up in New Jersey, and lots to talk about. We're going to do a lot of hockey talk tonight as the NHL finals continue. As we do it live tonight, they'll play Game 4 coming up a little bit later, but still a lot of great hockey to talk about. And that, of course, brings us to our guest. He hasn't been with us in a while, but always great to welcome back our NHL analyst, Jeffrey Payne, from out in the Nebraska area. Of course, he grew up in Long Island. He and I old college buddies, and he was affiliated with the New York Islanders for many years, so we'll get into what's going on with them, with Lou Lamoriello. And Don, first of all, welcome. How are you doing? And we'll welcome Jeffrey Payne.
Everything is great. Looking forward to talk to Jeffrey, and I know we'll get into a lot of that Islander conversation now that they've made those changes.
Jeff, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Good, Doug. It's always good to talk to you. It's been a while, but we will catch up on some important ice talk.
Let's start with obviously the series as it is now. We won't get into too much into tonight's game because people might be watching this or listening tomorrow, but just the series in general, Jeffrey, Don and I have been talking about it, throughout the course of the playoffs, just the Vegas Golden Knights story in itself, an expansion team, not to take anything away from what they've done, but I've said all along, and I'm not sure I think Don agrees, it is kind of, in a sense, show how the league is so watered down that a team can be made up of basically, decent players, but not great players, and take you all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1 year. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I totally agree with that because I think just George McPhee has done a great job assembling that team, and actually he hoodwinked a number of general managers. Teams were only allowed to protect 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goaltender. So he made deals with teams so that they would say, for example, we want to protect player X, we will give you players Y and Z if you don't touch player X. And he ended up, just with a treasure trove of really good players. It turns out some of them have exceeded expectations, like William Karlsson, who, played for the Blue Jackets. I think the most number of goals he ever had was 18, and he scores 43 this year. So, I think McPhee did a very good job. He was very shrewd in some of the deals he's made. He's also built for the future. He got a number of draft picks out of the trades he made. So, obviously there's parity in the league. There's no question about it. But I think you've got a team that McPhee put together that exceeded expectations. But also you have a coach in Gerald Gallant, who I've always been fond of as a coach. I think he got a raw deal in Florida, by the way. I think they should have kept him. And he's assembled a team that could play hard. They skate. They're fast. And this team believes in itself, and I think Gallant's gotten them to believe. So it's not surprising from that standpoint. But having said that, they've met their match now in the Capitals. This is the Capitals here. This is the team of destiny. They lost their first 2 games to the Blue Jackets at home. It looked like they were done. They come back and beat the Blue Jackets in 6. They're down 3-2 against Tampa Bay. They come back and win. Ovechkin's playing like a man possessed. In previous years, he did not play with the level of enthusiasm as he's playing this year. He wants to win the Stanley Cup. He realizes this is the icing on the cake, the piece that's been missing in his career. And you're seeing Ovechkin lead this team offensively to greater heights. And also, Braden Holtby has been playing out of his mind in goal. And you've got to have elite goaltending to challenge for and win the Stanley Cup. And he's playing tremendously in that, even though he had a fairly mediocre regular season.
Jeffrey, I have to say I agree with you 100%, especially about Holtby. He's just been playing super all the way through the Stanley Cup playoffs. And that's really where you have to start. I mean, you have to come to the goaltender and move out. If the goaltender's playing well or exceedingly well, you've got a much better chance in the National Hockey League of the Stanley Cup of winning. But I'd like to go back to your first point, and that was really you're talking about a general manager that put together 2 of the teams that are in the final, because he was a long time, Washington Capital builder of the franchise. And then, of course, I got to give the league a lot of credit because it's the first league that recognized if you're going to expand the league, you got to give players up. You have to give the team a chance to win. Now, I'm not saying that in my wildest dreams I thought they'd get this far, but I thought they made it possible with shrewd, as you pointed out, shrewd trading for the future to get draft choices and so forth. I think you got to give the league an awful lot of credit in this. There's no other sport that I can think of off the top of my head that even comes close to matching this.
I agree. The NHL did a great job. You know, part of the thing is that you've got franchises now. They're paying franchise fees of $500 million, $600 million. I think the Seattle team that's going to come into the league at some point in the future is going to pay probably $650 million. And so you really can't afford for the team not to be successful early because the owners are investing a lot of money. So I think the league feels that they have to give the teams at least a chance. And in this case, Vegas was given a chance, and they capitalized on it. And the thing that you talked about earlier, Don, is a really great point. Vegas would not be here without Marc-Andre Fleury. He is the face of that franchise. He's the first player they picked in the expansion draft. He's cooled off in the finals, but he has been spectacular the entire season.
Really?
Yeah, when they picked Fleury in that expansion draft last year, I always wondered what he thought. We've seen it before, Jeffrey, with expansion teams and goalies that just get absolutely shelled in that first season. It almost ruins their career. I wonder if he had that thought, or if he said, I think I can help this team win, and we have a better team than most people think. Because I was
probably
a little skeptical.
The latter. I think he's a really positive guy, great influence in the locker room. So he's been a contributor not only with his spectacular goaltending, but just his attitude and demeanor.
He's really been an ambassador to the team in Las Vegas, from what I've read. I mean, going around to events in the city. He really has sold, before the team was known, he sold that team last year. Tried to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And again, you build a team, as Don said, from goal out. And, Fleury has been a key for Vegas. And in the case of Washington this year, it's ironic that they started the playoffs. Holtby was not the starting goaltender. He had a very mediocre regular season, and they brought him back after the Capitals starter in the playoffs. Grubauer did not play well, and Holtby's been spectacular ever since. He made a stick save the other night in Game 2 that saved the game for the Capitals. So again, you got to win with goaltending. Now, it doesn't hurt to have Alex Ovechkin either. I mean, the guy is just lethal. You put him on the left side, near the face-off circle, and he won times as good as anybody I've seen.
Yeah.
He's probably the best pure scorer since Bossy, in my view.
Yeah. Now, you saw a lot of Bossy's goals, didn't you?
Yes.
He's almost, for a big star in the league, people don't really think of him that way. He's over 600 goals. I mean, you kind of forget his numbers are way up there.
Yeah, and also he's 30. I think he's 32 years old. Or going to be 32 years old.
Still
he's been
quite
around
young.
For a while.
Yeah. So
yeah.
He could play.
I think the other point you made, Jeffrey, was great about Ovechkin, and most of the post game analysis, and I like to watch that as much. This is one of the few sports that I really like to watch. The post game shows after the games are over. Most of them I don't care about, but I think some of the analysis during the course of the post game shows in the National Hockey League is superb. And one thing they've really emphasized, not only the fact that Ovechkin has been so involved in the contact and so involved in doing everything right to make his team a winner. They even pointed out at times where, they're ahead 3-2 like the other night, and rather than flip the puck out, he gets it, and only flips it down to, just over the red line. He doesn't get it down where they have icing. He does all these things, little things that don't show up, and yet they're the things that make you a winner.
You're absolutely right about that. You'll notice with Ovechkin, too, just as you mentioned, very physical. He'll take the body.
Right.
He'll play defensive hockey. He didn't do this in previous years, but he has learned what it takes to win a Stanley Cup, the sacrifice that's required. It takes teams a while to get there. You look at the Edmonton Oilers back in the 80s. The Islanders won 4 straight Stanley Cups. In 83, the Islanders swept the Oilers. And the Oilers saw the sacrifice the Islanders made to get there. In fact, when they went by the Islanders' locker room after that Stanley Cup win by the Islanders in '83, the Islanders weren't overly celebratory. They were actually licking their wounds. They were a physically worn-out hockey team, and the Oilers saw how the Islanders conducted themselves, how they knew what it took to win, the sacrifice that was required, and Ovechkin sees that, and the Capitals see that now. This is not the most talented team the Capitals have had in the last few years, But this is a team that has what it takes to win the Cup, and they're going to win the Cup this year, in my view.
Doug?
Let's talk a little bit about the coverage of it. You mentioned Don watching the post game, but you and I have talked a lot about it. Of course, we have to mention again that this outstanding job again by Mike Doc Emmerich. I mean, we've called him we didn't coin it, but he is the Vince Scully of hockey broadcast. Boy, he's really been on top of that game all series long, all playoffs long, as good as ever.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he is the best hockey announcer in the business. And, just describes the game brilliantly, understands the game. And also, he does his homework. He is very well prepared for every game, which is what makes him stand out.
No question about it, because he gives you some background on different things that happen, not only in the course of that game or in the course of the Stanley Cup, but where Joe Blow came from Film Flam. I mean, he's ready to go when they come out to play. He's got, like Vince Scully. Vince Scully always had the sidebars that went along with the game that were so interesting about the young players. And that's basically what he does in the National Hockey League in a good sense with all the action that's going on. He always picks the right spot just to throw in a little story.
Right.
He almost does
he also can be...
Yeah, good.
Yeah, continue, Doug.
I was going to say, he almost does a radio-type play-by-play, but it's not overwhelming on TV. It works the way he does it.
Right, he does. He actually gives more information than the average TV announcer provides. He also can be a little bit quirky. He'll talk about, he'll say 100 seconds to go in the period,
Or 3.25 minutes. You like doing the quarter-minute thing. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. But
got his own style, no question about that.
Jeff, you mentioned the Seattle team that's going to come in. I'm not sure if they've decided exactly when yet, next couple of years. And apparently Gary Bettman said in his State of the League address, a week or so ago, that they're going to keep the same format as far as the expansion draft that helped Vegas build quickly. Do you see that happening? And are other GMs in the league going to get upset about that?
No, I think it's going to happen. And, the GMs around the league, it's different than it was years ago with free agency. You've got a salary cap now, so it gives teams an opportunity to shed some cap space. I mean, obviously it favors the new team, but the Islanders, for example, had Grabowski, who they had to unload his salary, and Vegas had to get to the cap, to the floor, and so Vegas took him as well as third-string goalie that the Islanders had. And in exchange, the Islanders had to give up a first-round pick. But in that way, the Islanders were able to shed salary. So, it gives the GM some flexibility. Obviously, they don't want to lose certain players. But in this day and age with salary cap and other things, the GMs obviously accept it. They also want a competitive league. And also the owners want a share of that money. I mean, you're looking at $650 million. Each team gets about $20 million, So that's nothing to sneeze at.
Well, I think the other thing the salary cap proved more than anything else, too, was, look at Chicago a few years ago. They've had marvelous teams. Scotty Bowman's son, the general manager out there. And but because of the salary cap, they had to divest themselves of really top-notch talent, and now they got to sort of recycle and come back again.
Yeah, and you look at that team, though, it's really interesting because, Taves looks like he's much older than what he actually is, chronologically. He's played a lot of hockey, a lot of extra games. It's really, really physical. You play an extra 2 months, and you do that of course, they won 3 Stanley Cups. They went deep into the playoffs and, a number of times. In addition to that, it takes a toll on your body. So even the star players they've kept, the core they've kept, is kind of worn out right now.
Doug?
Jeffrey Payne joining us, our NHL hockey analyst, and he's out in the Nebraska area, but of course grew up in on Long Island. Let's talk about the team you were affiliated with for so long, still are. Lou Lamoriello going over to the Islanders from Toronto. First of all, were you surprised that he left Toronto so quickly and that he went to the Islanders?
No and no.
Okay, that ends that.
Once Lamoriello was no longer in charge in Toronto, his days in Toronto were dwindling. Lamoriello likes to be in charge, and the Islanders were a logical choice because his son is the assistant GM. And he also feels, and this is going to be a key point, if the Islanders re-sign Tavares, which they have to, this team is not as far away from contending as you might think. This is not a rebuild. I think they've got some assets. They've got draft picks. They have some young players that they can package to pick up the needs that they have. They need a first-string goaltender. They need an elite goaltender. And everywhere Lamoriello has been, he's picked up a number one goaltender. He drafted Martin Brodeur for the Devils, who led them to the 3 Stanley Cups. He picked up Corey Schneider in New Jersey right away when he was GM there. After Brodeur retired, or actually may have been, toward the end of Brodeur's career, and he will do that
after they forced him out.
Right. But he'll do the same thing with the Islanders. He's going to pick up a number one goaltender. He needs to pick up a top pairing defense, a couple of defensemen, or at least one. And they've got some assets. They've got draft picks. They've got 4 picks in the first 2 rounds. They have the 11th and 12th overall picks in the first round. They have 2 picks in the second round. They've got some young players that they could package to fill the holes they have, and they can quickly become a contender if they make the right moves. The key to all this, they must re-sign John Tavares. And Tavares has been waiting. First he waited on the arena, and the Islanders are going to get a new arena, and then he wanted to make sure the franchise was going in the right direction. With Lamoriello in charge, it gives the Islanders a better shot at re-signing Tavares.
Well, can he do it 3 times over? He had a great career, with the Jersey Devils. And when Doug and I saw we saw Tampa play Toronto in Tampa several times a couple of years ago. And I want to tell you, Jeffrey, you can't imagine how bad that team was. And then for him to bring them around and make them competitive that quickly is really quite a salute to him. And now, as you pointed out, he's got some talent with the Islanders, and he might be able to do it again and really make them a real competitive club.
Right, and they're going to be moving to Belmont in 2021.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah. They still haven't broken ground there because they're doing an environmental study. As you know, in New York, everything moves at glacial speed. So we'll see what happens. But the Islanders will be playing half their games overall in the next 3 years at Nassau Coliseum, which is exciting, I think. And that will help the franchise as well. This Brooklyn move was not a good move.
About 14 games next year, Jeff, and then about 20 to 25 split the next 2 years after that, something like that, between the 2 arenas?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
What's the Islander arena hold now? 12, 13,000?
13,000, yeah.
13, okay. I didn't know exactly what it held.
I think they might be able to expand that a little bit because New York State's going to invest some money because it was important to get the Islanders back. So they might be able to add some seats. And quite frankly, they're not drawing in Brooklyn. They're drawing maybe 11,000 a game. So they won't have the money from boxes at the Coliseum, but certainly with getting more fans through the turnstiles, they'll be able to generate some revenue that way. And again, this franchise, it's really interesting, has never been on firm financial footing. This goes back to 1972, and in the 70s they were on the verge of bankruptcy. Roy Bowe, their owner, was overcommitted, over-leveraged between the Nets and the Islanders. He then sold Julius Erving to the Sixers for $6 million in 1976. That was a heck of a lot of money then, still a lot of money. And then, the Islanders were in serious financial trouble, and Bill Torrey reached out to John Pickett, who was a minority owner, and then took over the Islanders, and the Islanders went on to win 4 Stanley Cups.
Yeah, that's when the Flyers began their run, too, and Keith Allen did such a terrific job of building the Flyers up and making them so competitive in between the Islanders, Boston, the Flyers. Boy, what a great period of time that was in the National Hockey League.
That was a great, and then, of course, the Canadians. That was a decade or 12 years that were pretty incredible. And the Islanders, what happened was after Pickett sold the team, they really haven't had strong ownership, and I believe they have that now.
Talk a little about the Islanders and, of course, the Devils, former Lou Lamoriello's foreign team. They got a little bit better this year, but how about the Rangers, Jeff? I know one of your favorite teams in New York, a new coach coming in from, was it Boston University, right? Their head coach up there, or Boston College. College coach coming to the Rangers. Of course, he's had, I think, some coaching experience in the NHL as an assistant, but what do you think of that move?
The Rangers have a lot of young players on this team, a lot of players who have played college hockey in the NCAA, and I think that is the rationale for bringing in a college coach. There haven't been too many coaches who've made that jump from the NHL, from NCAA to NHL. Not many have done it successfully, but David Quinn from Boston University is someone the Rangers wanted, and I think he fits in well with what they're trying to build. And the other thing about David Quinn, trivial fact, he was an assistant coach for the University of Nebraska Omaha hockey team, college team, when they first became a franchise in 1996 or 97. And so he was a coach here in Omaha for a few years in the mid-90s. It may have been one of his first, if not his first, coaching job as an assistant here in Omaha.
It always ties into something.
Go ahead.
It always ties into something of Jeffrey Payne. You tie it all together, Jeffrey.
You got to tie it into it with a nice, neat bow.
Go ahead, Don.
Don't you have to feel a little embarrassed if you're the Rangers, the Islanders, the Flyers? I mean, here's an expansion team playing in the Stanley Cup Finals, and the Rangers haven't been competitive for, 10 years now. The Islanders have struggled. The Jersey Devils have struggled. I mean, it's amazing to me that the standard franchises, Toronto, as we talked about before Lou got up there, just can't win. And this team winds up in a Stanley Cup. I'd be so embarrassed if I were an owner of a National Hockey League team and I saw what's going on right now.
Well, look at Montreal. I mean, if you're a Canadiens fan,
right,
and they haven't won the Cup since '93,
right?
Those fans up there live and die by hockey, and that franchise really did poorly this year. It has been not so great for several years. They have a great goaltender in Carey Price. So, yeah, it's disheartening. But again, it always comes down to who is your GM, who is your coach, because I do believe, and this goes back to Doug's earlier point, the talent level in the league is not that different. You have teams with a star player, Austin Matthews in Toronto, John Tavares for the Islanders. You have players Sidney Crosby and Malkin and Ovechkin, and you look at players like that around the league. But other than that, the talent level is not that different, and the difference is how well as a coach do you develop your players, how good is your system and your scheme, or the players adhering to that.
Right.
And those all make a difference. And so I think there's tremendous parity in the league, so teams could slide up or down depending on the skill and the savvy of their GM and coach.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before. I wasn't denigrating necessarily Vegas. I just think, like you said, there aren't that many stars anymore. Obviously, it's a larger league, and there's a handful of teams that have big stars, but everything else is kind of maybe AAA level, and everybody's, like you said, even. So you can build a team quicker nowadays. I just thought, to me, it's more watered down, but that's not necessarily a criticism. It is. That's a fact. That's how Vegas could do it. So, I mean, congratulations to them. But it's not like the old days where an expansion team, although the Islanders were an exception, their third year they knocked the Rangers out of the playoffs. But other than that, most expansion teams, other than that second six where the Blues made the final, somebody had to in that division. This is a rarity in sports.
Right, and I think the Flyers, to talk about Don's old stomping ground, Philadelphia, they won in year 7.
73, 74, right. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. Again,
and they got knocked out of the playoffs by the Blues with a shot from the blue line. They went in, and the Blues went to the playoffs, and the Islanders stayed home. So I'll never forget that. Well, two things I'll never forget: that offside call against the Islanders, and the shot from the blue line that the Blues put in to knock the Flyers out of the playoffs. But it's all been interesting. It's a lot of fun to watch, and I think all the playoffs. I don't care whether it's the NBA or, I can't watch the regular season, but the playoffs are always great to watch. And I think the same thing holds true in terms of the National Hockey League. The one thing I would like to throw out, maybe you saw it yesterday. I know you read the New York Post as I do, Doug. I know Jeffrey's not going to get it out in Nebraska, but they even said that Coop's on the hot seat. How in the world can you with the last 3 years that he's had, and the trades that Eiserman has made, and as competitive as that team has been, how in the world could Coop be on the hot seat in Tampa? I don't understand that.
But they fired the previous guy, right, after they missed the finals, right? Didn't Boston knock him out in the semis, and they fired him the next year, didn't they?
I don't remember
the
that.
previous coach of the
the
Lightning.
last one I remember getting fired was Thornton.
Yeah, the one after him, I forget his name, Jeffrey. You remember it? The guy that was he had a French name, and the Lightning went to the semis, right? And the next year they fired him.
Was that Guy Boucher?
Guy Boucher, that's right, Guy Boucher. Yeah.
And then they had the fellow that does the post-game shows on TV. He was there for about 6 weeks. He didn't last too long.
No.
But I think Cooper's a good coach, and
I think he's very good. I agree. Myself, my own opinion, the way he handles himself before the games, the practices, after the games, I really think he's an exceptional talent as a coach and has a great rapport with the media as well as with the players. I really do. I think he's an exception.
Yeah, actually, his winning percentage, by the way, you know what it is? It's .617. So he's winning he's getting points in almost 62% of the games they play, which is by far the best of any Tampa Bay coach. Number 2, Guy Boucher at .546. Yeah. And he lost his job after 2012-13 season. So he was only coach, looks like, for 3 years.
Yeah, they lost to Boston in the semis, right? And then I think he coached part of the next year. I'm not sure if he did or not, but they fired him the next season. So, yeah, it seemed a little bit of a quick
looks like he lost in the conference finals in 2010-2011.
Right.
Missed the playoffs in 12 and was fired 32 games
That's
in.
Right, yeah. He did one more year, and then they fired him basically the following year. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So,
and then look, he took Ottawa to the conference finals last year. Didn't make the playoffs this year. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think that goes back to Doug's point earlier, and your point as well. The even distribution of talent, there's just not very much margin. And to me, I've always been a believer that coaches mean a lot. They can say in baseball, well, the manager doesn't mean anything. Well, maybe you think that way, but I don't. And I think the same thing in the National Hockey League, the same thing in the NBA. I don't know enough about soccer, about the coaching there. But to me, I think in a lot of cases, to get where you want to go, you got to have the right guy.
Absolutely. And I'm going to segue. I'm going to just maybe take this show in a slightly different direction since you bring up coaches, because the Husker football team has a new coach this year, in Scott Frost. And I think you will see, Nebraska has an absolutely brutal schedule. I think it's one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult schedules in the country. But they will perform better this year with a lot of players that were recruited by the previous coach, because Scott Frost is a good coach and develops talent. And it makes a difference. Your scheme, how well you develop talent, again, the positivity that the coach exudes, how to push the right buttons. And Al Arbor with the Islanders was able to do it. Certain coaches have it, and certain coaches don't. And I think that absolutely makes a difference.
And they've had a lot of don'ts in Nebraska recently.
A lot of don'ts. And I think this is different this time.
Well, I hope so, because they're a prime example of what college football was for so many years. Not only with their coach and later their athletic director, but you like to see them get back into the forefront. And what was your take on when they made the changes in the conferences where they were playing?
That's a really good question. I think the reason they did it is because Texas was, pushing some programs around. They tried to form their own TV network, and it came down to a financial issue. And I think Nebraska never liked the fact that Texas was running the show. Other teams obviously left the Big 12 as well for the same reasons, one of them being Texas A&M. A&M and Texas had a rivalry that dated probably 100 years, and they went over to the SEC.
You don't have to explain that to me. I went to school there. Yeah. At the university, not Texas A&M.
I see. I didn't know that. But the thing is, Nebraska made this change, and I don't think to date they have adapted well to the style of play in the Big Ten. And I think that's been one of the things they've really struggled with. The Big 12, wide open, pass happy, not a lot of defense. Big Ten football is really tough, grind it out, really physical play. And Nebraska, if you look at the Wisconsin-Nebraska game last year, Nebraska went up early in the second half, 10 minutes to go, 10, 11 minutes to go, INT, pick six, Nebraska goes ahead. The Memorial Stadium here in Lincoln goes crazy. What does Wisconsin do? The rest of the game, they pretty much ran the ball exclusively, and they rammed it down Nebraska's throats. Jonathan Taylor, their great running back, just ran the football. You knew what the play was going to be. Nebraska couldn't stop them because Wisconsin is absolutely dynamite on the offensive line and the dynamite on the defensive line. That's the way Nebraska used to play in the Big Eight. They got away from it, and they're going to have to come back to it, and I believe they will under Frost.
Good.
Yeah, Frost leading UCF to undefeated season right across the road from us down here in Orlando area. Of course, he was hired, I guess, right before that final game of the season, but he played at Nebraska, like you said, so he's coming home again.
Right, he got a 7-year, $35 million contract,
yeah.
And I think the deal was set up that way because Frost wanted time. And he'll be given the time, and he needs to be given the time.
Yeah.
And one of the things he's working on, and one of the things he's found when he came here, the players were not in tip-top physical shape. Not to take anything away from Riley, but Frost has higher expectations in the weight room than the previous staff did.
Don, you got a final question, or we'll wrap it up?
Well, I just first of all, thank you very much, Jeffrey. It's always a pleasure to get together with you and not only talk hockey, but also talk about Nebraska football and maybe Osborne be reborn.
Yeah, I think, and Osborne played a very critical role in getting Frost back here. In fact, Bill Moose is the new athletic director here at Nebraska. He had been at Washington State. He came along. He obviously didn't know Scott Frost very well. Osborne does. So Osborne was involved in facilitating that. Osborne also indicated to Frost that the environment here administratively would be a good one for Frost to come into because of the new athletic director, the support from the chancellor and the president of the university. So all those things came together, and Osborne played a critical role in facilitating that. So these things don't happen overnight. But the Nebraska schedule, by the way, their crossover games, they play Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State. Those are the three games they play against.
Those are the easy games?
The other division.
Non-conference.
Of course, they play their own division games. So that's about as bad as it gets.
Wow.
And then they play Wisconsin on the road, and they're playing Michigan on the road, Ohio State on the road. They play Iowa on the road. I mean, schedule's rough. So I think the goal this year should be get to a bowl game, and reestablish the direction of the program, the confidence, and I think 2019 you'll see some special.
Well, you get a little. My last point, Doug, before we jump out, is that if you have $33 million to pay a coach, you got a chance.
That's it.
Exactly.
Jeffrey Payne, always great to catch up with you. We'll do something later in the summer before the college football season starts. Get your thoughts on a little more in depth on the full schedule. But thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the hockey, however much longer it lasts. I agree with you. I think it's going to be over in probably 2 more games, but we'll see.
We will see. It's always a pleasure. Don, great talking to you. Looking forward to the next show later this summer. And Doug, we'll talk again soon.
Take care, partner.
Take care.
Thanks for listening, everybody. And join us later in the week. We'll have Pete the Prophet on, talk a little Belmont Stakes.